Hi, my name is Frank Leaden, and my wife Julie and I have been coming to Lifehouse now for about 8 years. 20 days ago in Kansas City, Missouri, I was blessed and honored to officiate a wedding for some good friends, a young couple named Annie and Bryce Buchanan. Julie and I first met Annie and Bryce when they saved my life on a trail high above Lake Tahoe. So in September of 2019, Julie and I were up at Tahoe, hiking the rim trail at about 7,500 feet when I suffered a serious heart attack. After we had hiked up to the Outlook to have lunch, we were coming down the trail to get off the mountain, and I started getting lightheaded, experienced some slight heartburn-like feeling in my chest, but no classic heart attack symptoms that you read about. So I would stop and kind of get myself steadied, and then I'd continue down the trail, and I did that twice. I had to stop a third time, but this time the dizziness kind of overwhelmed me and I couldn't go on. So Julie called 911, and the call connected and then disconnected. She called again, and the dispatcher this time stayed on, the call stayed up and the dispatcher was on the line. But because of the terrain we were in and the relationship of the towers, she wasn't able to identify our location. At that time, I was laying on the trail because it made me feel better than sitting up being dizzy. And I was listening to Julie have a discussion with the dispatcher and try to describe where we were. I was deeply concerned, especially when I heard they couldn't find us. They couldn't see us. They didn't know where we were. And I started to pray, and I asked God to save me, if that was His will, or to bring me home with Him. I had a real peace and a calmness that I know only the Lord could have given me. And about 2 to 3 minutes later, after I prayed, God answered my prayer, and up the trail came Annie and Bryce. Annie was an intensive care cardiac nurse, and Bryce was an emergency room nurse, and they immediately started to help us. Annie worked on me, and Bryce went to Julie and took the phone, and he was able to pull out of Google Maps the XY coordinates and read those to the dispatcher, and I heard her say, "We see you." About 3 minutes later, I heard a siren, and it was a sweet sound because it was my siren. They took me in, and I had 90% blockage in my right coronary artery and 70% in the other two. So they took me into their catheter lab to do a stent, and my heart went out of rhythm a couple of times. They had to shock it back into rhythm. But they didn't want to do the other two arteries because I was a little sketchy. I was in the intensive care for 5 days, went home with 5 stents because I got back in and had the other arteries done while I was there. And this happened on a Wednesday. I went home on Sunday. Well, Annie and Bryce were visiting nurses. They were there starting their new jobs on Monday. And it turned out they were at Renown, and so Annie was on the same ward or the ICU where I was, and she went up to look for me, and of course I wasn't there, and she didn't know my name. About a month later, as I was recuperating and feeling as good as could be expected, I decided to write a thank you letter to the EMT team, because after they passed me to the hospital, they don't know what happened to me. I mean, I could have died. I could have been fine like I was. And then I wrote a letter of thank you to Renown because I had some phenomenal care there. The letter to Renown mentioned the nurses, the traveling nurses, and that we were grateful for them, but we didn't know who they were or their names. And so that letter pachinko balled through the organization at Renown, through HR, to the cardiac unit, and anyway, it ultimately ended up thumbtacked to a cork bulletin board in the break room. And about a month later, Annie was in the break room in December and saw the letter and said, "Hey, that's us." Probably late December, Julie got a instant message or not instant message, I am from Facebook, from Annie, and introducing herself and saying we were the nurses. And so Julie established a conversation with her, and we communicated back and forth. In January, we met them in Truckee for dinner at a sushi place, and we spent 3 hours with them, getting to know them and hearing their side of the story and sharing our side of the story, because they had questions for us, we had questions for them. We asked them, why were you on that trail that day? And they had picked the trail, but at the trailhead you could go down the trail or up the trail, and their dog decided which way they were going to go. They hopped out of their SUV, and their dog Frankie ran up the trail, so they followed Frankie. And when I was lying on the trail when they came up, they kind of kicked into full nurse capacity. Annie told us, actually with tears in her eyes, that they couldn't find a pulse on me. So yeah, I guess it was a lot more touch and go than I gave it credit for at the time. At any rate, a friendship developed. And they're in their early 30s, so they're young enough to be our kids, but they're just super, super people. And this friendship just blossomed to the point where we stayed in touch. We'd had them to dinner at our house and a couple of times in Meadow Vista. Probably a month or two later, Bryce proposed to Annie. And so we heard they were going to be engaged, and we got invited to the wedding, and we said, heck yeah, we're going to Kansas City. We're going to your wedding for sure. And so we made plans for that. About 2 to 3 weeks after the wedding invite, we got a phone call, and they asked me to officiate the wedding. And I said, absolutely. Made lots of new friends. It was a fabulous experience, and I'm sure they'll be in our lives for many, many years to come.